The first contact I had with the governor's office was in February of 2009. I was called by an appointment secretary of sorts and asked to come over and meet with the general counsel, and that it was important and urgent. And I couldn't meet that day, but I arranged to meet the following day during the noon hour, I think. And I went over and I met with David Cabrales, who was then his general counsel, and Marianne Wiley, who was an assistant general counsel in charge of criminal justice issues. So we began the meeting by discussing the commission in general, and then we started talking specifically about the investigations we were doing, and we seemed to get stuck on the Willingham investigation. As soon as I brought it up, it was the tone of the meeting turned more hostile, and Mr. Cabrales in particular was very adamant that that's not the kind of investigation that the commission was intended for. And I think Ms. Wiley at one point characterized our investigation of Willingham as a waste of state money. And I was criticized for bringing in an expert outside of Texas. And I just tried to respond by saying I thought that we had jurisdiction over the issue, but that I would go do some checking to make sure I wasn't off. And I also talked to them briefly about that I thought the commission wanted to go forward with the investigation since it was a unanimous vote to proceed with the investigation. Their position was that the commission was created to only investigate future and new cases, that it wasn't designed to investigate old cases. And when I heard that, I had thought about that before, and I had actually discussed that with Alan Levy, who was the prosecutor on the commission before. And I think we both had satisfied ourselves that there was no problem with investigating older cases, since it would impact forensic science in the future. I also had a meeting with Senator Whitmire's assistant, Lawrence Coleman, who advises him on criminal justice issues, and he reassured me that he felt that Senator Whitmire thought we were doing the appropriate thing. And so after all of that, and after looking at the statute again, I was satisfied that we had jurisdiction. And Mr. Levy, after I had that meeting, I talked about the meeting with him, and he said, well, it's kind of late now to stop the investigation. We've agreed to go forward, and we're proceeding. So. The Attorney General was acting as our general counsel at the time we decided to do the investigation. And we voted to do the investigation in August of 2008, and a representative of the Attorney General's office was at every meeting. And the issue of jurisdiction was never raised. The first time it was ever raised was by Mr. Bradley when he became chair. I began to be concerned that the issue was becoming political because the session was the legislative session was in play. I was concerned that the Forensic Science Commission might get defunded. I was concerned that that for the first time some staff members of the governor started attending the meetings, and they didn't attend any of the meetings before February of 2009. And so I began to feel that the issue was being carefully watched by the governor's office at that point. There was another meeting about a month later, I think it was in March or perhaps early April, with Ms. Wiley, and we discussed in general the commission, and she encouraged us to focus on activities other than investigations, such as liaisons with crime labs, tours of crime labs, and more general work. None of them ever said, don't do the investigation, but it was clear to me that they were uncomfortable with the fact that we were proceeding with the investigation. Dr. Byler's report was released in the summer of 2009, and I began to hear that the governor was looking for new appointees for my slot because he had requested that the criminal defense lawyers send him a new list for reappointments for September of 2009. When I became aware of that, I let the commission know that the governor may be considering different appointments, and that I felt like for continuity it would be important to keep the same people on the commission if possible to finish the important work that we were doing. So I think some of those commissioners wrote the governor's office a letter supporting me and asking that I be reappointed. And I think that the Criminal Defense Lawyers Association also asked that I be reappointed. And so it was about September 29th or September 30th of 2009 is when I got the call from Doris Scott, who works for the governor. And she said that I was not going to be reappointed and that the governor thanked me for my service. And at that time, it was a little bit of a surprise to me. It wasn't a total shock that I wasn't going to be reappointed, but the timing of it was really devastating to the investigation, because we had a meeting scheduled in Dallas for either 3 or 4 days after they called me, and everything was arranged. Dr. Byler was coming in, and we were going to do a public hearing where we were going to question Dr. Byler about the report he had prepared for us. And so the fact that they would call me 3 days before that meeting was a real surprise to me and a real disappointment. I'm certainly a little bit naive when it comes to politics, but at the time I didn't know. I knew that that was possible, that the motives were to perhaps derail or stop the investigation. I thought that that was a possibility, but I didn't really, I hoped that it wasn't the case. I wanted the investigation to continue and be concluded because I thought it was important for the commission, and I thought it was important for Texas that the investigation be finished. So at the time I think I gave the governor the benefit of the doubt that this was just a routine change. Although I had my suspicions, I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. Oh, looking back now, 2 years after I was replaced, you can't help but think that the governor's office was doing everything behind the scenes to make sure that the investigation was not completed. That's what I've concluded. I can't imagine that politics was not a driving motivator. I think that the unfortunate thing from my perspective is, had we completed the investigation, and we didn't even know what our conclusions were going to be, but had we completed the investigation, he could have perhaps used that as an advantageous thing in his political speeches to show that he had balance and he considered other perspectives, and that he did what should be done for the future rather than dwelling on the past and how it may look in a political campaign. Jurisdictional issues aside, I think that the forensic science issue is very significant in arson cases, and I think they should complete the investigation for 2 reasons. One is it needs to be put behind the commission, and the commission needs to go on to other things. And then secondly, it's important for people who are in prison now for arson and for people who have pending arson cases. It's not a ton of cases, but it's my understanding there could be dozens, if not hundreds, of people in prison in Texas having been convicted of arson, and I would guess some of those have the same issues that we were dealing with in the Willingham case. The difficulty with the case is you couldn't ever retry the case and determine if Willingham was actually innocent or not. But what we can do, and what we could have done, is make sure that the science, the emphasis on the improvement of arson science in the Texas courts was made. And I think the struggle I have is I don't understand how a leader, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, or otherwise, could stand in the way of a commission doing an investigation that would improve the justice system. And the Willingham case, in my view, would have been tried entirely differently under today's scientific standards. And I'm not even sure it would have gone to trial under today's scientific standards. And for a leader to stand in the way of examining that for the purpose of future criminal justice issues, to me is very disappointing.